So I want to do a review for Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, and it's the third book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which is the main Malazan series. There's some other ones, and some of them are by a different author. This is the main one, though. It's the third one in the main series, and it's the best one in the series so far by, I'd say, a good, solid lead. It's the biggest book, it's the most epic, and it's the most, it's just the most satisfying. Like, it has such a kind of triumphant yet crushing ending to it. Sort of a bittersweetness to it all, and it's powerful. I have a few friends who have read this series before I have, and one of them says Memories of Ice is his favorite fantasy book of all time, and the other guy says it's one of them, so that says something. And just to kind of give you the setup here, it's immediately pretty engaging because it picks up right where Gardens of the Moon left off. Now, Deadhouse Gates, of course, just takes a few characters from Gardens of the Moon, goes off to a whole different continent, and then you see this whole other basket of problems sorry, I have a cat here that's kind of in the way. This whole other set of problems in the Malazan Empire, and it does a number of other threads in the overarching story. But if you read Deadhouse Gates and you were missing some of the characters from Gardens of the Moon that you liked, you're going to be pretty engaged from the get-go, because you get the Bridge Burners back, you get a lot of the other Malazan characters, the Darujistan characters, some of the gods and other high-powered characters from that earlier one make an appearance. So it's all pretty good from the get-go. But anyway, it's picking up where Gardens of the Moon left off, and basically the good guys, we'll call them, have to kind of team up, because you've got the Malazan forces and the coalition of guys that they were fighting. They kind of have to team up here and fight this new threat that's referenced in the later parts of Gardens of the Moon, which is kind of this fanatical, religious, cannibal army that's sweeping through the south, and it's going to be a problem for them. So they recognize that they need to deal with this. And it's epic. I mean, so on the one side you've got, of course, the Bridge Burners, and a lot of the Malazan forces are, just regular humans, but with a bunch of tricks up their sleeve. And they've got mages and stuff on their team. And then you've got like Animander Rake, and the leader of his Dark Elves, basically, or the equivalent. I don't even know how to pronounce it correctly. The Tistandi. And you've got so I mean, he's got the soul-sucking sword, and he's got all like his basically Dark Elf magic ninja army and their flying fortress. You got the what's the other guy? Caladan Brood, who's got a hammer that's so powerful it can destroy the world. You've got the leader of the Tlana Mass, which is like the undead army. So they all need to join forces, and then what are they up against? They're up against this crazy cannibal army that has like, well, I don't want to spoil one part of their army, because it's kind of an interesting surprise that comes up. But they've got hordes of like naked, starving cannibals, and like these magic assassin guys, and wizards of their own, and heavy infantry, and like just big nasty stuff. And their leader is, of course, like an extremely powerful sorcery user as well. So this is like high stakes, epic, high powered stuff. The epicness of Memories of Ice is way higher than the previous books. So that's awesome if part of the allure for you is the epic side of things. I just contrast that with something like, Game of Thrones or something, where it's lower magic levels. The characters individually aren't very strong. They're kind of just regular people for the most part. So, different sets of problems. It's like, what does Captain America deal with versus what does Thor deal with? It's kind of like different types of adventures there. And this is like high power. Again, the gods are interacting with the mortal affairs. You've got the Ascendants, which are kind of like the superpowered different characters. And then the regular humans and armies that are even able to interact at that scale because of the tricks up their sleeve, their own magics, their own weapons, and their technology, like their explosives. And then, of course, the undead army, like individually, each clan of mass is extremely strong. And, they're all immortal in their own way. And it's just crazy. Again, the epicness has to be emphasized whenever you're talking about Malazan, but for Memories of the Ice, if you're enjoying the epic levels of it all, this is a huge step up from Gardens of the Moon, which had its share. Even Deadhouse Gates, where the main story was kind of the Chain of Dogs stuff, you still had the Icarium story, and that was kind of a higher powered situation. And, the shapeshifters and stuff, so there was higher powered stuff there. But this is a lot more prevalent in Memories of Ice. And you've got a lot more people gaining like the Ascendant powers for various reasons. And you've got a lot more Ascendants like on one side up against the very powerful enemies on the other side. And then you've got kind of these wild card characters that come in too. Like, again, not to spoil anything, but there's this quote-unquote army of 3 guys that plays a bit of a role. And this army of 3, I think they call it like the Retribution Army or something, but they're so hardcore they can take out hordes of guys on their own. They truly are an army unto themselves. Yeah, so anyway, there's a lot of that stuff that happens, which I love, and Erikson gives all his battles, and the epicness of the characters has such a cinematic quality. It's so well done, and you really visualize it, and you really get stirred up by the intensity of it all. So anyway, the character development's also really good, because I guess it's different when you're immortal, or you have such power at your disposal, or you've lived for tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years in some of these cases, and the idiosyncrasies and the personalities and the way the characters are just rings true to me, and I find it really interesting to read kind of these fictional stories of characters like that, and Malazan has that in spades here. But anyway, what else should I say? So one thing that's interesting is, if you've kind of looked at the series, the last book is called The Crippled God, and the Crippled God is, in a sense, kind of like the villain of the story, or one of the antagonists, at least, for what this book's about. I mean, his role isn't the dominating thing, but he is kind of in the background. He's introduced here very early, so I don't feel like that's a spoiler or anything, but he's introduced as somebody who's kind of getting involved in things now. And of course, reading the first few books, you hear a few mentions of it, and you're interested to see Crippled God come into play, and it's very cool. He's introduced in a very interesting way. Again, very cinematic quality, the way he's introduced, and the image of him gets released. Kind of burned into you, and you think, oh, well, this is a cool villain, and I want to see more of this guy. But Erikson has a lot of restraint with him. But anyway, so that's really cool that he's kind of finally comes on the scene in this one. And so many new characters are introduced, which are pretty awesome. High-powered and kind of lower-powered. A lot of characters go through these major changes that is going to have some major effects for later on in the series, you can tell. But because of how these books work, you don't necessarily know what book these things are going to come up again. A lot of major characters are, maybe killed and wiped out or transformed in some permanent way that they're not really the same as they were before. So the stakes are very high. There's a lot of like high drama, major shit that goes down. Especially the ending is just quite emotional, and the big final battle and showdown is of this massive scale, and you've got a character list in this book, and it's got let's see if I can show you here. If you've seen these books, then no surprise, but I mean, you got a lot of characters, and a lot of them are maybe gonna have some problems in this book, but a lot of them are new as well. They're not just straight up from Gardens of the Moon. They introduce a lot of interesting stuff here. And you really care about where this story is going. Now, one of the things that happens is... how do I talk about it without spoiling? So, let's just say a big theme of these books is compassion, and you'll see that come up a lot, and it very much does here. And there's a major, I guess, act of compassion that happens at the end of the book. Well, there's a number of them, but the one I'm thinking of in particular is really quite powerful, and has a major emotional impact to it because of the build-up over this 1,000+ page book. And that's part of what makes it really satisfying. So even though this is book 3 in a 10-book series, there's a lot of major things that are resolved here. So a lot of things are left hanging, but you do get a major event that it feels really good. And it's not just the bad guys beating, or good guys winning a war, or winning a battle, or killing a final boss or something. It's bigger than that, and it affects a lot of people, and it's there's a great build up to it, and it's an extremely satisfying resolution that kind of gives you a good punctuation mark for at least one major story. Although even there's still some places that's going to go, because it kind of teases you a little bit. But for the most part, you do get a major resolution. You do get 2 major major huge battles. One of which is, again, it's not a spoiler, but talks about it on the back a little bit. The siege of this giant city called Kapistan. Or I guess not a giant city, but it's a big walled city, and there's a major battle there that goes on for quite a while in the middle part of the book. And then there's the final big showdown at the end. And there's a bunch of other kind of scraps and beatdowns along the way, and tense kind of confrontational, violent moments. What else makes this book so awesome so far? Well, again, the world building, which is one of the major parts here. You either kind of think it's too much and you don't want to deal with it, or it's really what kind of makes these books so great, is yes, this world building aspect. It's almost harder to read, and it's almost actually slower in some ways than the previous books, which you might not think is a good thing, but it does work. It's just that even though the book is almost easier to read because you're starting to understand how the world works better, you're starting to understand more of the terminology, the words, the people, the places, At the same time, though, it's really starting to pile things up. There's more and more threads going on. It's putting a much more or a much greater volume puzzle pieces at you. And the picture's coming together more and more, but instead of kind of the trickle of information, it becomes pretty heavy at times, and that can make it difficult. But I really recommend kind of going with the flow, not worrying about things so much if you don't understand them. Just kind of like maybe keep them in the back of your mind for later, because often things are explained and you don't necessarily have to wait too long. But other things you do wait a long time for, and it doesn't really detract from the experience if you can't remember everything along the way. Somehow Erikson makes that whole approach work, because there isn't really tons of exposition. It's just you're kind of dropped in, and people are talking about things, and you just, as the reader, pick it up as you go along. It works, though. It's just, this is a bigger book. There's way more going on, and it's quite a lot to deal with. But I don't think that detracts from the book. It just makes it kind of harder to read in some ways. But anyway, also, again, the cool factor, which is a major part of these books, the cool factor is way higher in this series in terms of the crazy, over-the-top, awesome stuff that's happening, and the, some of the, I guess we'll say, monsters that are introduced, and some of the military tactics are interesting. Some of the big battles are cool. The major betrayals and the major outmaneuvering, it's pretty awesome. Anyway, I don't have a script or anything. I'm just kind of like rambling, and I haven't read this book in a long time, so some of it's not too fresh. But I think that's maybe enough for now. Like, this is the most epic book so far. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it also gives you a good resolution in and of itself. And in a way, this is basically the end of the prologue of the series. Or if you were to kind of group the books together in kind of a trilogy shape, this would be the first book, I think. Because honestly, and this might sound weird, but I think House of Chains, which is the next book, I think that's really where kind of the main story starts to happen in a lot of ways. And all the earlier stuff is set up. That's important, but it's... I might not be giving the earlier stuff enough credit because I haven't even finished the series, but it's laying a major foundation. But a lot of the real conflict in the background starts to come to the fore in House of Chains and Midnight Tides, especially, where you start to understand what the real conflict of the series is a lot better. Anyhow, do I have anything else to say about this? I don't know, but this is epic. If you've been kind of excited to read Malazan because so many people have said Memories of Ice is great, but you're intimidated by the full thing, I mean, you just got to dive in and do it. It's worth it when you get to Memories of Ice. It's got the humor, it's got the depth, it's got the characters, it's got like just this dialogue that I think is great. The writing is just so like epic and weighty, but it moves quickly. This isn't like a 1,200-page book like Wheel of Time where you read and like nothing happens. Things are always happening. And there's so many threads where things are moving forward every chapter, sometimes even every section of a chapter, because it's bouncing like kind of like a TV show between different characters and scenes a lot. Every page, every discussion is moving forward character or plot, and it's so much faster moving despite the size that he's working with here. Like, it's quite efficient. But anyway, you got to get this book. So you got to read the other Malazan books, and then you're off to the races, because I personally think House of Chains is the next book, and it's even better in a lot of ways. Although it doesn't have the same kind of intense emotional ending on the same level as Memories of Ice, but it's pretty powerful even on its own. And I'll talk about that one at some point as well. But you got to read Malazan to get to Memories of Ice, and I think, like a lot of people, if you're into epic fantasy stuff, it's going to rock your world, and you won't forget the ending. It's really powerful. What happens to some of the people who are really yearning for, let's say, redemption, which isn't the best word, but we'll go with that for now. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe comment in there, or maybe just stay tuned for next time. Maybe it won't be so long before I do the House of Chains review, or the Gardens of the Moon review, or whatever. I gotta eventually review them all. Anyhow, talk to you later. Memories of Ice, Malazan. Bye.